Okay, great. Well, now you remember that we had plan 1 and 2 in our new business modeling and decision tree. And so you also remember that we've been through this 2 or 3 times. We've gotten through all of the go, no go, and moved on to the second page. We went through the initial market research stuff. And so here we are at the financial analysis. We've talked about these a little bit, but I wanted to kind of wrap it up a little bit, and I've added some new information. It's too bad Edgar's not here because we used a Mexican restaurant as the market, but that's okay because he'll be able to maybe watch the video. So we're going to jump right into that, and then we'll be ready to talk about the marketing plan. We'll talk about expenses across the volume range, pro forma, and then we'll be ready for next time to jump into the bigger marketing plan. So I'm going to rush ahead here quite a bit. Whoops, excuse me. I'm going to rush ahead and get down to the financial pieces, and here we go. And so this is really just the introduction. You remember the break-even analysis. We're going to look at and we've also done a lot on cash flow projections. We're just going to brush through some of that, but we haven't done the pro forma income statement and forecast, and that's what we'll be focusing on. So first, the break-even analysis, and again, this is just a refresher for you guys, but basically we start off with a volume, revenue volume line in green. Then we have our expenses that in red, and then on top of those we have the variable expenses, which start at the top of the red fixed expenses, and then they go up basically with some percentage of increase based on the sales. And we'll kind of touch on this again in just a minute with real numbers. Let's see, and also this is the link that people will be able to go to see the rest of it. So, okay, cash flow projections. I'm just mentioning for those who haven't seen this really, that we do this fairly simply. It's not very hard to do, and we basically start with income categories, which is really cash sales. It's your accounts receivable, which happen to come in during that week. It's any loan proceeds or anything that comes in to the bucket. You remember the bucket that we had in the first one. And then, of course, we take a look at the basic inflow as a total. So in this case, it was 23,800. Next, we look at the outflow, and that the first outflow is this percentage of cost of goods sold. As a basic cost of sales, and that can vary widely from something small like this one is. This one represents, maybe cost of food, so it's pretty small. Then we take a look at our expenses for the week, total them all up, the fixed expenses for the week, total them all up, and it's pretty simple. You adjust it by any loan payments you have, any draw that comes out that hasn't been accounted for, say to the owner. You've got your total outflow, and then here happens to be your weekend balance. So all you do is you take the weekend balance, put it up into week 2, and then you redo this over and over again. So that's the basics on how you do cash flow projections. It's simpler than doing a financial statement. Then we do the income pro forma statement. And here we're going to switch over to a spreadsheet. And
hey, Ron, real quick, what does pro forma mean?
Oh, it just means like a future performance is all that means. It's a word that's not very often used. It's used a lot to describe pro formas, but it's often not used very much. And so I guess I should have mentioned that. It's not surprising you maybe haven't heard that. Okay, so we have
version of performing. I'm sorry.
Performing, yeah, right.
Proforma is the Spanish version of performing.
Yeah, right, right. So pretty close. Or
Close.
performance, maybe, I mean, there are a lot of derivations to it. So first we want to just kind of focus on an income statement. This is really simple, and this happens to be, it could be for a restaurant. So we've got revenue. I just made it easy, 100. So we just say it's 100,000 or whatever, but it also works as a percentage. Then our variable cost in this case is 35. That would be 35% or $350, equaling a gross margin, which is 65. I like to put the gross margin as a line item. Some financial statements don't do this, but I really like that as you take your cost of goods sold, you subtract it from your revenue, and you've got your gross margin. And then everything else is subtracted from that. So now you've got your rent, and here's where we run into, and we haven't talked a lot about this for a while. Here's where you take a look at all your expenses, but you have to categorize them, and you may as well do it while you're working on this. And that is, you've got your rent, but what kind of an expense is it? Well, it's mostly a fixed expense. There are not very many rents that are variable, but there are some. Malls almost always have variable rents. In other words, you pay a threshold of money that is X dollars per square foot, and then once your revenue goes to the break point, they start charging you a percentage. In say a fashion mall, that would be say up to 7, maybe even 8% for very expensive fashion malls. That's a lot of money. And the catch there is the more revenue you do, the more rent they get. Now there's a nice part of that, and that is that, well, it incentivizes them to do advertising and promote your location. But I've never found that it really did very much, except a few cases. For instance, I used to have a store client that sold mostly luggage. They had 3 or 4 pretty good sized stores, maybe 4 or 5,000, 6,000 feet each, maybe bigger. One of them was in the Beverly Center, and you may know that that's a really high rent district. And in those days, it was outrageous, and today it's about 4 times higher, 3 times higher than it was. But I mean, you're talking about massive dollars of rent per square foot. So you have to put merchandise in there that is going to pay for that. And once the better you do, the more rent you pay, and it never stops. It just keeps right on rolling. Of course, you got something for utilities, typically very small numbers. Office and supplies, small, those are both fixed. You've got labor. Now, this is almost always I shouldn't say it. This is split between a variable and a fixed. So, for instance, you're opening a store, you've got to have a certain minimal number of people or a restaurant that have to cover. Got to have a cook. You've got to have maybe a hostess who kind of organizes things, etc. Seats people, and then you've got to have somebody that's going to serve take the orders and serve the meal. So hey, you got 3 people before you even start, right? Have to have 3 people, and you're going to have coverage for whenever you're busy. In retail, it's going to be from 10 until 8 in the evening. In a restaurant, it might be from 10 or 11. You might let some people go at 2 and then bring them all back at 4 and go to 7 or 8. So, you can vary that a little bit in a restaurant. Now, what happens though is, and we're going to talk about this just shortly, what happens is that as you grow, you can't just have 3 people, you have to start adding a few more people. At some point, it turns into a variable cost because the more business you do, the more employees you'll have to hire. So it kind of turns into a variable. And I'll show you how to do that in a spreadsheet or a tabular form in just a sec. Okay, salaries, they're almost always fixed. That would be the owner, maybe a manager. Then you have employee benefits. This is a little tricky. I put fixed here, but it is always variable based on the size of your labor bill, but not directly variable. So the more employees you have, the more cost you're going to have for insurance. but one's a percentage of the other one. So you could build into your spreadsheet, and we're companies that have a lot of benefits. And I don't know, Christian, you might fall into this category where you have a lot of things that have to be done in terms of perhaps a pension, perhaps, and of course medical benefits, and you may have a unemployment compensate. You will have an unemployment compensation, and then your mod rate, which has to do with how much risk there is for unemployment. Sometimes it's high, like roofers is a crazy high bill because a lot of roofers get hurt. So that can be a variable expense. And so just a caution there, it generally for really small businesses, it's generally a fixed cost because you don't have as many of those and they don't tend to go up very fast. But they can turn into a variable that's driven not on revenue, but it's driven on your increased labor. You got cleaning supplies and maintenance supplies, auto and truck. You buy your truck, you spend a certain amount of gas. You may or may not drive it a lot. If the difference here is that, Christian, in your business, the power used to both get the truck where you're going and to do the work that you do is actually part of creating your service. So in this particular case, there's an argument to be made that everything having to do with the truck is a variable expense having to do with how much revenue it does. But you're up against a fixed cost too, because if you've got a loan on that, you've got that loan payment that's fixed. If you drive more, you've got more gas and you've got more insurance, and so that's a combination as well when you're in the business that you're in. Marketing and advertising is almost always a fixed expense, but there are a lot of companies that drive their marketing budget off of their revenue and let that be a percentage of revenue, so that the more revenue they do, the more marketing money they spend or advertising. I like to treat that mostly as a fixed expense so that you achieve your goals and then the percentage drops. I think you can do that, but it's a lot harder to do than using the other method. And it has to do with how big your market is and how much exposure that you need to have in order to drive your market. So that's a marketing decision. Depreciation, of course, is fixed. I didn't put anything here because it's not a real expense. It's really a tax deduction, okay? So it doesn't have really any place. I put it there just so that we would be able to say it doesn't have any place in trying to figure out if you're making money. And Ed would disagree with me. And the reason he'd disagree with me is because if you're in the real estate business, and he's got several rentals, and I've got one, and he says, look, if you don't calculate your depreciation as a tax savings off of the income you would have had, then you're not calculating the true return on investment of the investment. And so you do need to look at it as part of the return on investment. And it's like, well, okay, I get that. It's taxes you would not have paid. But from a planning perspective, trying to use depreciation as like an additional write-off can be a little crazy, and they're never representative. So you depreciate a house or a rental at 27 years. Well, is the house shot in 27 years? No, it's gone up in value. You depreciate a truck at whatever the rules are. Is the truck shot? It might be totally wasted in half of your depreciation time, depending on how rough you are on it. So it used to be that depreciation was a way to, in advance, calculate the cost of an asset that is falling apart, depreciating. So it has a legitimate, there's a legitimate reason to put it in there as a cost mechanism, but it's almost always done by the tax guys and never done by the operational guys, and so the number doesn't mean much. So you have to be careful about how you do that. Of course, you might have additional owner's comp. You may have interest if you borrow money. So you got your total expenses, and then you take your total expenses and subtract it from your gross margin, and here you are with your profit. And of course, the government gets its piece, and at this low volume, it wouldn't be that much, but it can be very, very high and very impactful. Now, the question then is, if we look at, we've done the break even, and you see the lines crossing and where your money is going to be, but it's also nice to do it this way by having your volume go. So here's our pro forma here in that column, the one that's over on the left. So we did one at 50, and then we went to 200, 400, 600 to see how it might change. So at 50, we've got, lower cost of goods, and we've got a gross margin of 32, so it's going to be half, but your expenses are almost all the same. Now your labor is a little bit less. In this case, you're not going to hire maybe that extra half person. So some of these costs you have control over. They don't change from being fixed or variable, but you have control. Those are different. And so you end up with at least $46,000 in expenses, and you're losing about $13,000 to $15,000 in that case. You've got no taxes, and so there's your loss. Then you shift over to the one that we just did, and you've got the same basic number. You've got 3% profit, and you're kind of, if you hit that your first year, you're off to the races, and that looks pretty good. Then when you double your business, now you've doubled your cost of goods sold, you've doubled your margin. You haven't doubled these numbers though; they're about the same. I pushed up marketing and advertising just a little bit. Now we have more money. We thought we'd do more expend. Then we added 10 grand in for the owner, who finally now gets to have some cash, and you end up with 58,000 or percent in gross profit. Pretty healthy. You pay your EBITDA, and that's the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Those are real in the sense that your taxes you have to pay cash for. Amortization and depreciation are tax items, which help not hurt your income, but you still have a lot of taxes to pay. So by the time you're done, maybe you've got 28,000. Then what you do is you say, okay, let's go to 400 and 600, and what happens? Same kind of ratios happen. Now, all along this, of course, you're going to monitor your cost of goods sold to make sure it doesn't change percentage. When you have high volumes, your percentage might slowly go down. That's what you want to shoot for, because you've got the advantage of the additional volume. Better buying opportunities and so forth. This is just straight line. And so you can see that this turns into a pretty nice little business. Here's where the variable rent kicks in, so you've got more rent. Here you have some additional labor. I have pushed this up, but it does level off. If this were a restaurant, you may hit 600,000, and you may be hitting your seating capacity. You may have little room for growth. It's hard to say. Depends on your physical plant. But we're going to say in this particular case, you're not hiring more people because you really can't get more people in there, but you're getting more per meal. Your food costs might go up a little bit, and people are buying more, and you're busier more frequently. Salary, same thing. You might take more money, and you have the ability to monitor that and change your overall position. But I've still pushed the owner's comp way up, and we come out with pretty nice earnings at $175,000. That's not too far off for a restaurant that's a small operation doing $600,000. So when you look at this, because now remember, we're talking about, okay, is this a go or no go? And what we're trying to determine is, okay, we have to spend the money. It's X amount of dollars to open the store, buy the inventory, have operational costs reserved for cash flow. There's your investment. Now the issue is, can we pay for it? So if we hit this middle one and you can make 28,000, you may say, okay, you know, I can live on 28,000. 10,000 is not very much for a salary, but maybe you're one of these workers and you've got another 5 or 10 or 15,000 coming out. You can survive. You're not going to be satisfied, but you're going to make money. And the only thing you have to do then is say, let's simply get this volume to double again. And when we get it to double, now I've got 20 base salary plus 86. Really, if I have enough cash in the business, I've got $106,000. Not bad off of a $400,000 business. So the question then is, number one, can I sort of break even? And we'll kind of say, well, 200,000 is reasonable because you could make it work. You got to do 200,000. That's your go or no go decision. Is it's really prosperous? Okay, at 400,000 we can grow, and if we can grow to that, now that's my more enthusiastic. Yeah, we should give this a try if we can go. If you can get to 600,000, it's like, hey, we've got a lot of upside. This upside is really a pretty nice risk given, a pretty nice benefit given all the risks that we've taken into consideration. There's only one thing left, and that is, let's go back and let's see if we've got the market to be able to do this business. And so that is really it. That's how simple the pro forma is. Now, yes, you have to go through and look at these expenses and sort them all out. Spend the detailed time to look at, say, financial statements, to do research. If you're Edgar, you know what your expenses are per restaurant. You plug those in, you adjust it for your rent, any change in hiring practices, and you plug them in, and you now have a pro forma that is going to really help you make a decision on a location, assuming you understand the market. And so now that's our next step is, well, let's do a quick look at the market. So in this particular case, and I'll show you how I got to these numbers. So in this particular case, I took a look at Rialto just because that's kind of where we're at. And I think was one of his restaurants in Rialto?
The most successful one.
Okay, good. That's interesting. Boy, we'll have to have a conversation with him about this. So I was able to find out by looking at Info USA that there are 23 existing Mexican restaurants in Rialto. That blew my mind just to start. I mean, I just thought, wow, how can you have 23?
Is that a lot, or in your why do you blew your?
It just seemed like it to me. I mean, I think Rialto's bigger than Redlands, but in Redlands, I'd say we have 12, 15 maybe. And so Rialto, well, why? Well, I don't know. Is it because there are more Hispanics over there? I don't know why. Is it the younger audience? I really don't know. So, we're going to make some assumptions here, and they may be wrong. But what I've done is I've said, well, let's figure out how many core customers. Now, I don't know his business, and it would be really fun if we could pick his brain on this issue.
But so trying to get him in here. It's just during the week I seen him work, and they're working.
We'll go through some of this stuff and with him and see. It'll be really interesting. So what I'm going to do is I want to switch over now and show you how I got to these numbers. And here's the 13,903 leads. And what I did is first I looked at the geography. So I just assumed that we were going to open, there we go. I assumed that we were going to open on Foothill Boulevard. I mean, who knows where, it would be, but seemed good
He's
enough.
in Foothill Boulevard.
Is he really? Oh,
yeah.
Man. So what I did is I drew a 2-mile circle. Now, how do I know that? That's just kind of a ballpark. I would drive a mile or 2 miles, and for good restaurants, you drive a little further, But for the most part, if you have that many restaurants, you're probably getting a lot of local business and they're not going to be far away. Well, so, okay, this is the core group of people. How many are there? There are 13,000. So then the other things that, well, not, there are more than 30, there are 29,000 in this radius, okay? 29,000. So then the next thing we do is we take a look at a couple other attributes, and I just plugged these in here. In those attributes, I figured, okay, let's just say that the format of the restaurant is going to be sort of like an everyday, not a high-end restaurant, but more of an everyday, people who go out and eat for lunch pretty frequently. Occasionally, they would take their kids, maybe to a restaurant where it's a moderate restaurant. It's not a high-end restaurant. So I just figured that might be the case. And so I just said, well, okay, our customers are going to be from 18 to 49. Just as, okay, who are our core customers? Then just for interest, I put in a couple of others. Let's see. I decided to check out the Hispanic side of this, just as an exercise. So for this exercise, we might just argue, and it could be totally wrong, but we might argue that the primary customer is going to be this profile and is Hispanic. There'd be a secondary market that would be everybody else. That might add another 30, 20, 15,000 people. But if he had done a survey and discovered he had a very large Hispanic, audience, then this makes sense. Now, if he had had done other surveys and discovered it was 50-50, then our market's way too small. It's only, you see, but it's better to err on the small side than it is to err on the big side. So we don't want to take the first one and just say, well, all of these 29,000 people are going to be customers, because they're not. The really old people will not be customers. The really young people will almost never be customers under 18. So we can eliminate them. You may have single people who don't eat as much on their own, but maybe they do. But see, these are all of the behavioral patterns that you want to think about. And that's why knowing your customer better gives you a better opportunity to open this new store. So we put that whole thing together, and then you say hit price, and it comes out 13,903, and that's where this number comes from. So we're going to say, okay, our core customers within 2 miles, younger and Hispanic, and it could be anything, but we'll say that's what that is. Now the next issue is, well, okay, how much business is that per restaurant? So what I did here is simply multiply that times $23 average ticket. So, you're going to have some singles, a lot of doubles, and occasionally more. And so if you're figuring, $10 to $13, we'll call it 23 bucks, and it comes out to $604,000. How often are they going to come in? Well, I figured every other week. Now, some restaurants like this have a weekly or maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So you can see how that number could change. But this is kind of the conservative one because we're trying to come up with a go or no go. And so the next thing we need to do is to calculate what that would be. And that comes out to 15,000 times let's see, customers per restaurant, 29, 23 times C4. Then I recalculated what the average tab was, and then calculated that it went from customers to money. And so we've got an opportunity of about 628,000. Well, interestingly enough, and strictly just by happenstance, that happens to be a market that's over here on our pretty good spot. Now, I would also go through and I would count up how many tables there are, how many 2 tops, how many 4 tops, how many 6 tops, and try and estimate the number of tables you can get and the number of turns you're going to get for breakfast, lunch, dinner, how much you're open, so that you could make sure that you've got a capacity to be able to handle this many customers. Doesn't do you any good if you only do a lunch business and they're lined up outside. Half of them leave because they can't get in. You know, you've got to have them spread out so that your plant can handle the number of customers. So that's another consideration to look at. And so then our decision is, you know, can we meet or beat the average restaurant? Because what we're doing here is we're saying we're going to go into business and hope we can steal 628,000 from the 23 restaurants. And if we can, then we're going to get our piece and we're going to be able to do at least average. Now, if you're a better restaurant, if it's a bigger restaurant, if it's a better location, the location is huge. You know, they say location is number 1, 2, and 3 of importance in retail, and that's true. So assuming all those things are true, you might be able to do more than this, maybe a lot more. So is it enough to be able to pay for the physical plant? Well, if you've got 10 or 20,000 square feet, that's not going to get paid for $600,000, and so you got to, you know, go or no on that one as well. And then if that's not the case, then you come back and you go, okay, well, what about the other markets that could supplement this? Let's take a look at, like, for instance, when I was clicking through under Hispanic, it had Hispanic again, and then it had Puerto Rican. And I don't quite get that. You know, so it's like, okay, that's Hispanic, but I mean, what's so different that they break it out? I just didn't get that. But so there may be some subgroups in there that you look at. But then also you've got the rest of the population, and you know you're going to get every race, you're going to get some of every income group, of every educational group. You're going to get, you know, there'll be preponderances of these groups, but you're going to get some of them all. So this is just the basics. I mean, so maybe you go, well, we can do another 20% because we didn't count the rest of the marketplace. So now maybe we're at 800,000. Well, it's still not enough for a 10,000 square foot restaurant, but we could size that down. We could make this work and do quite well if we do it right the right way. And if that's not true, then you need to consider to appealing to a broader market. And so, you know, if you do, say you're really in a strong, say, Mexican market, and you're appealing to them, then that's fine. But if that market's not big enough, now you do the white man's taco. You know, so you're like, there are other ways you can do the same thing, and you can attract additional people in the market, as long as you don't undermine your core capabilities. And I don't mean capabilities in terms of can you do it. I'm really talking about in terms of your specializations. So, if, you know, in Edgar's case, he's so specialized in this regional Mexican cuisine, really, that if he got too far out of that and he starts doing, you know, like a white man's taco, forget it. That's not going to work. So he gets 5 white guys walk in, and he has 15, you know, of his customers walk out. It's like, whoa, what happened? I mean, I thought they used to do the specialty stuff and, you know, the stuff I liked, and now they got these white man's tacos, and that's not what we want. So, you know, you have to control the market and just be rational about how you do it. So, in this case, if we had these numbers, this would be a go. It's like, okay, we've got it. It looks good. This can actually work financially.
The white man's taco. I want to add a little comment to that. Is they're authentic with the tacos that even for me it might be a little bit too Mexican sometimes, because I'm not gonna touch the taco de tripa or the taco or the tostada de pata. I'm not down that Mexican, even though I'm super Mexican.
Yeah.
They are very authentic. They have some of the meat that I would never even consider eating. And it's
right.
I look at their sales, and yeah, there's some huge, you know, like authentic Mexican market that they have. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
white
I
men
mean,
taco.
I know I understand the new. I mean, I don't know those specific nuances, but having spent a summer down in Mexico City and going to open markets and stuff, a long time ago. I'm sure it's changed. But I mean, I used to see tuberculosis-ridden dogs in the marketplace. There were things I wouldn't eat down there, and of course, we don't have any of that really going on here. But the nuances are important. What makes his restaurants unique is what creates his success. And so, you take a look. Like there's this one restaurant in Denver. Uh, what was it called? Oh, it was something like Casa de Maya. Not like there are lots of those around, but it was this Disneyland place where you go inside, and it was 20,000 square feet. They had waterfalls. You thought you were in the mountains above Acapulco. They had plants on the inside. They had like rock lava formations around all of the tables, and so they were all clustered one table at a time. They had divers jumping off of the falls. I mean, it was like this whole Disney like experience. And what did they serve? They served white men's Mexican food. You know, no aficionado would go in there, and we used to laugh about it because um, we had some real Mexican restaurants where I grew up in Longmont, because we had pretty good sized group of Hispanics, and we were really integrated in those days, back when we didn't know what that was, and we were all in the same teams, and we were playing together, and we went to the same dances, and we were all together. We didn't know the difference, but we had some good small Mexican restaurants that were like first generation, and so a lot of us knew what Mexican food was, and we traveled to Mexico. And so, our boys would go there and they would laugh about it because they go, "Is this what you're serving for Mexican food? Really?" And of course, in Colorado, most of the time in those days, you couldn't get any good Mexican food. And now people go to Colorado to get good Mexican food if they live on the East Coast.
It's funny.
They think
So
it's good. They think it's authentic. It's not. It's like, and of course you have an awful lot. Well, one of the best Mexican restaurants, I worked in a Mexican restaurant. It was a good sized place, about 10,000 feet, called Tico's. And the guy who built the restaurant he was an Italian guy. And he decided his family had always been in an Italian restaurant, so he knew the business, and he decided that the Italian restaurant business was just saturated, and so he went to Boulder, Colorado, and he got this old building, completely rebuilt it. It was just wonderful, and he basically put in great recipes, and he did a really good job of doing a Mexican restaurant that people would travel for miles to see. And he was an Italian guy who didn't want to serve spaghetti anymore in a market where there are lots of Italians and lots of Italian restaurants. He was the first large, really good sized plant Mexican restaurant in the whole county. And man, oh man, we would be busy. Wow, we were busy just all the time. And the price was really nominally priced, so that students could afford to go there. And of course, he had a full bar, and people would go and end up buying good but inexpensive Mexican food, and then staying and spending 3 times as much at the bar. So it was a great, great, great success. And that guy ended up being my landlord. I rented his warehouse, or his kitchen, really, where he was making all that stuff, and I turned it into a warehouse. So anyway, that's another story.
I've been paying close attention to their comments on Google from that restaurant, and I have about 10 years worth of comments. So I was able to kind of like look at them.
Good.
One of the things I've noticed to really try to understand their market, and I was really curious about it, was the amount of comments on the authenticity, excuse me for that word, of
Yeah.
actual torta ahogada, because it's almost like a novelty in Mexico, right? It
Yeah.
represents Jalisco and it represents the city of Guadalajara.
Right.
So the amounts of people that come from Mexico, visit Mexico, specifically Jalisco, specifically Guadalajara, you can't leave that state or that city without trying a torta ahogada. That's almost like a rule.
Wow.
So there is literally a lot of variance to that torta. They get so specific to the amount of salt you put in the bread, to the amount of crispiness it's supposed to be on the bread, the color of the bread.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how many fanatics there's out there for how a piece of bread's supposed to be cooked, right? Or baked, excuse me. And that's what I started noticing is like, wait a minute, it's actually, that's why it varies the name of the item that they're trying to perfect. And when you go in there, what people is they have expectations is perfection of how it's supposed to taste in Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the biggest comment of a positive review. And sometimes some random guy that throws in a review that it's not into what it is because he has his opinion of what a torta should look like.
Right. Well, and that is just a fabulous example of authenticity, which is, as you may remember from my book, is that authenticity is one of the differentiators to build a niche market. And in authenticity, and when I was going through that and really thinking that through, that was sort of one of the last characteristics I added when I was writing the book. And it was because I felt like there was existence of a bunch of businesses that you did well, but you couldn't explain why. And I realized after really looking at it that at least one more characteristic was authenticity. We went to and you've just done a perfect example of that. Molly booked this one place that was supposed to be this great authentic Route 66 kind of hotel, and it was just outside of a national park. And so we showed up there, and oh my gosh, she was thinking, oh, this looks, it looks like the place you check in but you don't check out. Looked really strange, and and we go in. And I won't tell a whole story, but you go in and there's a piano, and he's got this old, stupid, chipped dummy lady with a bikini laying on the piano. Like, this is the kind of place it is. Well, it was just corny enough to kind of go along with this whole sort of like Route 66 thing. And then we go ahead and we check in, and the people seemed nice. The rooms were great. It's just that the hallways looked like you were not going to return, but everything else was fine. We were having breakfast the next morning, and these guys were all German. And we're kind of finally asked somebody, they're a bunch of motorcycles. And of course, we thought, wow, what kind of group is it? Well, they turned out to be these German guys, and they're dressed in their leathers. We struck up a conversation. Well, in Germany, Route 66 is like a huge thing. They have these bars that are devoted to Route 66 paraphernalia and this whole kind of myth of, going from Chicago to LA on Route 66 and all of the strange little TP hotel rooms and, those kinds of 1950s things. And then they buy a bike in order to be able to do it. And this is what they do is they come to America, they ride Route 66, on Harleys. That's their deal. And half of the people were in this hotel because it was listed on this German, place as a unique, authentic place. That's why they came. That was their business. Scared the heck out of us at first until we realized what it was, what it was really for. So that's when I realized there has to be a difference. Disneyland is Disneyland. It's the only Disneyland because even though it's fake, it's the only authentic Disneyland. Everything they do is the best and high quality. And as good as their other quality stuff is, it's still the authentic experience. It's all the other parks are never authentic by comparison to Disney. And that's just, you get like Levi's. Those are the authentic jeans. They're the ones that created the genre, and they'll always be the authentic ones. So it's a big deal. And so if they've got this aura, man, they have to protect it so carefully.
There's something that I want to finish up with this on my end is the all the I just started noticing that all the restaurants that I have or locations I have one thing in common, and they're the closest thing to the authentic actual food that it's in Mexico.
Yeah.
From the ice cream place that I have, which is La Perla Michoacana, which is the Michoacana ice cream place. They're the closest thing to every comment I notice. Like, oh, it tastes so good. It's the best one. It's actually like it's made. And the owners are actually born, raised, and were one of the first ones to work for the ice cream places in the actual state where this ice cream was made.
Yeah.
So then you have the Mariscos de los Tion guy. That guy's famous, ridiculously famous in the Inland Empire. And it's because authenticity. It's what I've been noticing is the trend with every single restaurant that I become
Yeah.
client.
Well, it's a powerful differentiator, especially if you can develop that aura. And the question then is, how do you make sure that you incorporate that authenticity into the branding? That now becomes pretty important. If you can yeah, you do that several ways, but I mean, your marketing plan really needs to address that. And that's where your positioning statement guides the company, because it's like, okay, authenticity is going to be a big part of what we're going to do here. And how are you going to maintain that authenticity? Other people can come in and try and copy you.
And that gave me the idea. Could that be the trend of Local 360, Red Local 360, which is just finding some of the most authentic restaurants I can find in the Inland Empire?
Yeah, yeah, that's another way to do that, is to create that authenticity. Now, it does leave you open for being copied, but once you can associate the brand with the aura and the authenticity, then it's hard to take that away, even though you have the same product. But that's sort of the upgrade. That's like, you're never going to be Polo, because only Polo is Polo. But you're going to be able to make exactly the same identical clothing, but you can't ever use their logo. And it just amazes me how many Polo shirts I see around, that are 3 times more expensive than, the kind of shirts I buy, And so, I mean, there's that kind of aura, but there's that kind of risk at the same time. The market risk can be substantial, and therefore you have to decide from a strategic perspective, what are you going to do? And you're either going to grow to absorb all of the market, so there's no room for anybody else to gain a toehold, or you're going to patent what you have, so there's no way to actually make it. Hard to do in the fashion and clothing business, if not impossible. The branding is something you can do a good job with, and you have to just make sure that you maintain that. Your logo can be protected. So, but how do you brand the food? But you can support your brand with coasters, with cups, glasses, in other ways, and certainly you can brand clothing very nicely. And when the brand, we talked about this with Christian a couple of weeks ago, when the brand becomes part of the clothing design, now you've sort of done a couple of things there. You really created two elements of differentiators that people can't just take away, because they can't copy your brand, and so or your logo. So those are some of the ways to do that. But there are a lot of businesses that have these good ideas, and they get gobbled up because they don't understand how to maintain their lead, or protect what it is that they do, because the copiers inevitably will come in, just like a vacuum. When you grow when you grow your business, you create a vacuum, and everybody wants to jump in there because they see money being made and they'd like to have some of that. So that's the problem with that. And the benefit. It's both a problem and a benefit. So that's really it. We've kind of gone through it. We're ready to go into the marketing plan, which we'll do next week, and get started on that. It's kind of a lot, and I hope it doesn't end up getting too boring. I got paid, I think, $7,000 each for participants on this program. So it does have a value.
Everything you do, Ron, has a lot of value.
Oh well, that's nice of you to say. But I was going to say, that was a government contract, and so it probably was way overvalued compared to the actual. I was never able to sell that to a for-profit company for that money. That's for sure. So.
No, it's speaking of value, is I'm probably gonna start a weekly meeting with a couple of startup businesses that maybe want to be restaurants.
Okay, great.
Vendors and food trucks.
Okay.
At the local 360 office that I told you about is ready to go.
Sure. Yeah, great.
Spend all week building it up, and that might be I think it is going to be closer to be called more of an incubator, really, than an actual business consultation, because it's mostly teaching them the basics of business, even as simple as trying to find a DBA, because they don't even know how to do that. How to get an ID, they don't even know how to do that. So
right.
We're launching that, and we're probably going to be meeting more after hours.